What is up, and welcome back to another episode of the Wizards podcast. I'm your host, Greg Finberg, and in today's episode, we're going to continue diving into all of this news and speculation surrounding the number one pick. You have this two-horse race seemingly between AJ Dybantsa and Darryn Peterson. Who is Washington to take one? Is there going to be some sort of trade? It seems like everything is still out in the open just 4 days before the draft, and I'm excited to be joined by Ben Standig, who runs the Last Man Standing Substack. You know him from his Commanders coverage, and he has a lot more Wizards coverage with this new newsletter. So really happy to have you on the show today, Ben.
Greg, thanks for having me, man. You've made quite a name for yourself around here, despite not doing. You got a lot going on in your life, so kudos to that. Yeah, I'm excited to talk to a fellow Wizards enthusiast.
I'm excited to dive into it because you've done pretty extensive reporting over the last couple of weeks when it comes to this race for number one. You reported recently that it seemingly is this two-horse race at number one. And obviously, the Wizards are not going to share information on who they're actually looking at. But I'm sure everyone can surmise that it's between Peterson and Dybantsa. There were reports from ESPN that the Wizards have narrowed it to Peterson and Dybantsa. And I don't love reading into betting lines too much, but I know Dybantsa's minus 450 to go one, Peterson's plus 380, and Boozer is all the way down to plus 3,000. So it seems like the betting market also reflects that. What have you heard over the last couple of days, weeks regarding Washington's stance at number one?
Yeah, the betting market to me is always confusing in these regards because they don't have a line to Michael Winger. Or it's one thing if you look at like a regular game, a football game or something. They have the data for the teams. I get that how to manipulate the line, but I all they know is what people are saying, and right now people are saying Dybantsa most likely or Peterson. It's really fascinating. I mean, from the moment they won the lottery, it's been all Dybantsa, it feels like all the time. And that was in part because the Peterson confusion over what the hell happened with him last year with the cramping was still up in the air. I, I think from the outside, it probably still is a little bit up in the air, but I haven't heard of any issues with his conditioning or anything since. I had Bobby Marks, the ESPN front office insider, on the radio. I was a radio show I was hosting the other day, and he was like, "Look, they go through at the combine. They go through extensive medical testing. That's obviously a huge deal for the teams at the combine." And he said they didn't hear about anything there. So if we put that aside, then it just comes down to these two dudes, and they represent two fascinating things. I mean, one guy, Peterson's just a flat out scorer. Make can do more than that. But and then the other guy is like, it just feels like he's a perfect fit for what this modern era of basketball is. This 6'9" wing, good length, can play four positions on offense. Obviously they both have a work in progress, but it's a really interesting debate here.
When it comes to the top pick, obviously you have the Wizards who have this power of choice, and Michael Winger and Will Dawkins have said that a lot over the pre-draft process that this power of choice is big in terms of being able to decide how the draft unfolds. There's obviously all these reports and speculation that's always going to happen. It happens in the NFL, it happens in the NBA, and you don't really know what's going to happen until the draft. Do you think that there's any sort of positioning going on with the Wizards front office? Do you think that a lot of this could just be all of this speculation and they've known the entire time, for the last couple of weeks or days who they're going to pick? Or do you think they're really still considering their options just 4 days away from the pick?
Well, it's funny. So covering the Commanders and being aware of what's going on with the Wizards, the two front offices operate, I think, very similarly. Like I think generally I've liked both of their processes of how to rebuild the roster. Obviously, the Commanders when they Adam Peters came in was a mess, but they don't talk. So whenever I see stories of like speculation, I'm always like, I don't know that that's an accurate depiction of something that they are saying. But what I remember is in 2024 when Jaden Daniels, they ultimately picked him. Now we kind of knew Caleb Williams was going to go one, and then it was Daniels and Drake May, and I think it became clear it was going to be Daniels, but they weren't saying anything. Then when the draft was over, Peters was like, "Oh yeah, we knew 3 months ago." I'm like, okay, well, he could have saved us all a lot of time on some level, but okay, cool. So I mean, it's possible that's the case here. Um, Look, it's every option should always be left open. I know I'll hear people say, oh, they can't trade the pick. Well, I mean, sure, I doubt they would want to, but if somebody comes in with the Paul George type trade offer where it's like some young, interesting players and 1,000 draft picks, you have to make that determination. We all have heard that Utah, in theory, wants Dybantsa because the BYU connection, the owner had a say in getting Dybantsa to BYU. So, if you can let Utah think, hey, you're not going to get him unless you make a move. Sure, I think all that is in play, and that's front officing 101, and they should be doing some of those things. So I don't think they're putting out too many messages would be my guess, but at the same time, it's not that complicated. I mean, if we think we're down to two, and I do think it is those two. I mean, there's an argument for Boozer, obviously the analytics, and he's a very good player. His fit next to Sarr on some level is kind of intriguing, but I just don't think from the athletic upside that he makes the most sense. If you're going to have this number one pick, you've put on all this time, you want to shoot for the moon, and they don't. If they had already gotten, no disrespect to Alex Sarr or Trey Johnson, but if they had, or Bilal Coulibaly, but if they'd already gotten one of these guys who was like, oh wow, this looks like the number one guy, then maybe they could go with a more refined player. But I think they have to still shoot for the moon. So I don't know that they've made their decision yet, but I also don't believe that they're like running around trying to manipulate the world. I just think they're doing what they're doing.
It's a, you make a couple good points. The one about like Winger and Dawkins very tight-lipped. They don't. It's why when you see reports, it's like, where did you get this information? It's very interesting to see where you got it. Because I don't know what people's sourcing is, but I know it's probably not Michael Winger and it's probably not Will Dawkins because they do not like to talk. But another thing you mentioned was just the Boozer stuff was kind of like, if you watch basketball, if you know what the Wizards kind of need here, you could probably surmise that it's not going to be Cameron Boozer. And I read a whole article and I explained why I would take Dybantsa over Boozer because I think Boozer's more of a complementary piece. And that's not a disrespectful thing to say, but like, I don't believe he's the driving force to an offense. I don't think he's the guy you go to at the end of the game. But I think that's Darryn Peterson. I think that's AJ Dybantsa. And so the ESPN report kind of just like reassured what most were probably thinking. What you had already reported that it's probably just between Dybantsa and Peterson for one. You mentioned all of the stuff with Peterson and the medicals. I've seen reports that have indicated that NBA teams are not concerned with it. I'm not sure if you've heard anything based on what Washington or other teams are thinking about the medicals, but to your knowledge, is that something that is any sort of concern for teams at the moment?
I don't get that sense. I mean, just to be candid, like it's not like I've had, people say to me, okay, I looked at all the data and the medical stuff and he's fine. I haven't heard that. But like you said, sometimes, where there's smoke, there's fire. Well, where there's no smoke, there's no issue. And there really hasn't been anything, right? So from what I gather and just interpreting the lack of noise, I don't think that's an issue. I think the question is, is so what really did happen there? Like to me, I wasn't paying that close attention to what was going on with Peterson missing all this time. Just figured, he's got some injuries or whatever. But then when Bill Self, I forget what game it was, but after a game he was asked about Peterson, having to take himself out again, and he was like, "Well, I thought we were past this. I guess not." And I was like, "Ooh, okay, that's a lot." Maybe he was just getting tired of the questions. And he came out later and was nothing but positive about the player. And obviously Peterson, played through the rest of the season, or most of the end of the season, goes to the combine, doesn't look like he have any issues. So I don't get the sense, but I guess I do still wonder, and maybe I think others do, is like what really did happen there? Was there any part of it like he lacked? I don't want to say lacked competitiveness because all these guys are competitive, but like was there something there? Like he just something was preventing him from getting out there more than he could have. And if that's an internal thing, does that give any red flags as to how he's going to handle an 82 game schedule? I mean, I think that's the one thing about Dybantsa. It looks like, who knows what level he'll reach, but it looks like he is going to be a feisty competitor day one. And that like his confidence is very high. You've seen all the interviews and stuff. So, I don't know if that's like tiebreaker, and maybe this is being unfair to Peterson. Like Peterson is, I said to somebody earlier today, actually, I know what AJ Dybantsa looks like, sounds like everything. You might be Darryn Peterson. I don't know, like I don't know what he sounds like even really. I mean, he doesn't do he doesn't do any real media. So that's an interesting dynamic as well. But yeah, I don't sense that the medicals are an issue. I just think it's a matter of, if anything, it's like, well, what could he have played more, and if he didn't, why didn't he? But other than that, I don't think there's any issues there.
And you just put out pretty recently a deep dive into Peterson and the prospect of maybe taking him at one. And there's a lot of good sourcing and a lot of good quotes in there. And I believe it was from your article where there was something that mentioned the creatine stuff. And it was like, well, how did you not know it was creatine until after the draft? Like how was that not something that was resolved or found out? If you just started taking it and now you're having these problems, why did it take this long to circle back to the creatine stuff? So again, it seems like it's not the biggest deal in the world, and maybe it was a one-off for certain NBA scouts. And if the talent is there, then certainly I'm sure, if he's good enough, then they won't care too much. But it's very interesting, and it seems like there was a report this morning from Mark Stein that kind of indicated there's kind of traction building that it's a real possibility Washington could take Darryn Peterson at number one. Obviously, there was the ESPN report that he canceled that workout with the Utah Jazz. What's your read on that possibility of Peterson going one? Because I know in your articles it was like the growing sense is it's probably Dybantsa and it's split, but like how real do you think it is possibility wise that Washington takes Peterson?
I mean, I will say it does feel like, and I don't want to overstate. Like if I say what I'm hearing, I don't want to. I haven't talked to 32 teams. I haven't talked to every. It's nothing like that. So it's just the pocket of people that I've had a chance to talk to. It does feel like there's more of a growing sentiment that it could be Peterson, and I suspect that's in part because of what we were just discussing, like that the medical stuff is probably put to the side and not as big of a deal. I have not worried about fit for 1 second for the Wizards in terms of these draft picks for the last several years. Just whoever's the best player, bring them in. You're in no position to worry about the fit. And I think for the most part, that's still the case. My only wonder though is, okay, if you're gonna say re-sign Trae Young here to 3 years for 120 million, 150 million, whatever it's going to be. Okay, they're not the same position. I give you that exactly, but at the same point, that seems like an awful lot to be investing in the backcourt. So, and then you still have Trey Johnson. Obviously, you can always make a move. Versus where Dybantsa comes in, it's a much easier fit, right? There is no obvious. I mean, they have guys who are swingmen, but like he would be the clear three next to Sarr and Anthony Davis right now. So that aspect, again, that's not how they should be making this pick, but at least it lose a little bit more. I mean, they have said themselves, right? Their intention is to try to compete this year. Okay, well, if that is the case, then you can't just keep saying bring in the assets and we'll figure out the rest. I always thought that was a flaw in Daryl Morey's strategy. This is not about the draft per se. This is about getting trades to free agents, but you can't just say, we'll bring in the assets and we'll figure it out. I think you do have to have a plan. I think the Wizards have a plan, but the position aspect just hasn't mattered. So, look, if they think Peterson is all that, I mean, I mentioned in the story and others have said people have made Kobe Bryant comparisons. And I know the first time when I heard that, I was just like, whoa, what are we talking about? You're telling me that this guy is, and I don't think they were saying he's going to be a top 10 all-time player, but stylistically and the mentality, I'm like, still, that is an awful big comp. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. Now do I need to rethink this? But I also, he is I don't like the term combo guard. I think that to me is always like you're neither. To me, he looks like a two who could maybe play someone, good instincts passing. Whereas Dybantsa, it looks like could legitimately play, let's say three spots. I mean, I've heard somebody told me he could play four. I don't know how much he could, maybe not in year one. I don't imagine he would be running the point, but okay, maybe over time he's got enough handle and vision. But that's the thing. The versatility with Dybantsa to me, I don't know if it's the tiebreaker, but it kind of feels like it is. But again, I feel like I'm talking in circles. But if they think that Peterson is all that, and I know a lot of people do, then yeah, I mean, again, you can't make the pick based on what you have. It's too big of a decision. But at the same point, you're giving Trae Young that kind of money. Okay, well then how's that going to work?
The quote that you're referencing is the person that said he could be Kobe, but like what happened? Like there's so many crazy things that happened in the season where he was the consensus number one alongside AJ. I know ESPN had him as the top prospect in their class before the season, and then all this happens. It's incredible for the season that he went through with all the injuries, the ups and downs. That like he's still in consideration for the first pick. It shows how much talent he has. But he also, I don't know if it's positioning on his end. I don't know if it's just him trying to show the Wizards that like he wants to be in Washington. But he did cancel the Utah workout, which AJ Dybantsa didn't. And I don't know if Dybantsa just gave Utah that workout because he's friendly with the front office and I'm sure the staff, and he went to games, etc. So he thought it was the right thing to do. I don't think that means that Dybantsa thinks that he shouldn't go on. And so how much do you read into the Peterson stuff? How much do you read into the fact that he has canceled the Utah workout and seemingly established this position of, I think I should be the number one pick, and I want to make Washington understand I really want to be their top pick?
Yeah, I was listening to Brian Windhorst's podcast the other day, and he shared that AJ Dybantsa's dad, who's very involved in all aspects of his son's process here, sent him a photo that showed him holding up like a jersey, one for the Wizards, one for the Jazz, to say, we're good either way. And it feels like they've been very, sort of loosey-goosey. They're taking it seriously, but I mean, they're kind of rolling with whatever's going to happen. With Peterson, I guess the notion is that he may not want to go to Utah because they've already got Keontae George, who it's not he's more of a one, and Peterson, like I said, more of a two, but there's still some overlap there, and I guess they're also rep by the same agency, and agencies want their guys to get paid. It's hard to have a couple guys like that get paid, and then so I think there's some of that. I also wonder, let's just say Dybantsa goes one. Utah has a weird roster. I mean, they're kind of like the Wizards, right? Because they went out and got Jaren Jackson. They actually have more talent than it would suggest, being as bad as they were last year, and they have a lot of front court talent. I know they have to make some calls with what to do with Walker Kessler and so on. So, like, Peterson kind of feels like he would be like the opposite of the Wizards. Peterson feels like he would be a better fit on their roster, whereas Dybantsa, like, they have a lot of guys, including like Ace Bailey, who do similar things. But Cameron Boozer, obviously his dad, Carlos, played there and is part of the front office. I'm sure Carlos Boozer is not telling Danny Ainge what to do, but clearly they're going to be as familiar with him as humanly possible. And, maybe Peterson's side, like it's like they're saying, "Hey, we're going to break up with you before you break up with us. If you're going to take Pete, we think you would take Boozer over us, so we're going to act like we don't want to go there, maybe." I don't think it means the Wizards are taking him. I just think it probably means he's positioning himself with Utah in some way. Either it's because of the Keontae George factor, or he's not confident that they're going to take him at two.
I think it's interesting what you discussed with the Keontae George being a point guard, at least viewed possibly as a one by Utah, and then Darren viewing himself in the pre-draft process as a point guard and not wanting to go there. When I mean, yes, I know Trae Young opted out and he's technically a free agent, but it seems like all signs indicate he's most likely going to come back on some sort of long-term deal in Washington. He's way more of a true point guard and number one than a Keontae George, who Utah played at the two sometimes, played at the one towards the end of last year. But to me, like that problem exists no matter if Peterson goes one or two. And honestly, it exists more for him in Washington because over the next couple of years, if you're committing long-term salary to Young, you're not going to have Darren at the one. I don't think he's at his best when he's playing point guard. I know Bill Self played him off ball and he didn't like that. But like when he was playing the two, coming off pin downs, just basically going and scoring the basketball, which is what he does best, that's where I thought he was his most impactful self. And so again, like you mentioned, you never draft for fit when you have the top pick. You take talent 100%. But when it comes to Darren, it seems like the fit alongside a point guard like Trae Young wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. Like, do you buy the fact that, he truly doesn't want Utah? Is that like a real possibility? Or do you think he just wants to show the Wizards that I want to be in Washington?
Um, oh, look, I'm sure he would love to be the number one pick. I like. I'm not saying like he can't play off the ball. He did, in the story there was numbers about him playing off the ball and the shooting, and I think that is, still a question about him. It's just that like Trae Young is not just a point guard. He's not just a scoring point guard, but he's a point guard that dominates the ball a lot. And I know he led the league in or very high in assists and all that, but like the ball's going to be with him, and you just have there like Trey Johnson to me feels like a better fit with Trae Young just because he is more of that classic catch and shoot 3-point threat, right? So are you maximizing Darren Peterson if this other guy is really kind of running the show a bit more? That's the question, right? I mean, like, Kobe Bryant was never the point guard, but obviously he was the ball dominant player. So that's interesting. I mean, like I said, you can't. It's still you got to take the best available. But the Trae Young aspect, if you're committing 3 years to crazy money, I mean, and the Wizards are saying they're trying to move up, then he's obviously going to be a big factor. So that's why, like, I'm with you. It's not saying it would be a bad fit. I just wonder, are you really going to maximize this kid? Now, maybe there's an argument that says, well, we let Trae Young the first year take control and Peterson adjusts. Cool, I get that. But then what? Like, that's my only wonder. And also like, and you may have a better feel for this than me. I mean, he's listed at 6'6", 6'4" without shoes. I never quite understand. He's playing with shoes, so why do we care about without shoes? Um, but I mean, Trae Young's obviously not the biggest guy. So is Peterson going to be able to handle whoever is the best guard on the other team, right? Because it's not going to be Trae Young. You're going to hide him as much you can. So that's another factor. At least like hypothetically, I don't know if Dybantsa could guard smaller ones, but he could guard um, guards, right? His defense needs work too. So yeah, it's not the worst. Like I said, I suspect that Peterson's what he's doing is more about the Utah component than the Wizards, but obviously going number one would be, pretty freaking cool.
Yeah, I mean, my first read on it was if I'm Peterson, maybe he understands his floor might be two. Like maybe there's no reason to do another workout with Utah because he knows if Washington doesn't take him, then he's just going to go two anyway. Maybe he's all right if he just goes three. He knows he's not falling outside the top three. So his camp knows what they want. Clearly, they're signaling it to teams. Uh, let's talk a little bit about the Dybantsa aspect of it because we talked a lot about Peterson. But it still seems like Dybantsa's the pretty consensus favorite to go number one overall. Um, what are you hearing about him and his game and the Wizards' interest in it?
Yeah, I mean, in this era to have a guy that is a switchable piece is huge. And obviously he looks like he could be all that. I mean, um, you know, he's not bulky enough to play center, but if people are going small ball, he's got the length to deal with with some of those guys. So you could really kind of play him almost anywhere. Now, look, the question I think is, does he, he's very online as we can see, and I'm not suggesting that means he's not being serious on the other end of things. But I think one question is just does he accept the fact that he needs to put in more time to improve the shooting, get more impactful defensively, or whatever it is that the team says we need to see more from you? Again, I'm not saying this is like an issue, but I think it's at least something that they're gonna wonder about for sure. But again, like the athleticism, the length, he shot over 50% from two. I mean, I think also the fact that when they lost Richie Saunders, right? Their second best player, essentially, a guy who could be a first round pick himself, when they lost him late in the year, I have seen situations, covered teams of situations where a guy gets hurt, meaning somebody else has to step up and they are not equipped to do it. That they either because of their lack of all around game or their mentality. That was not the issue here. I mean, he was not unafraid of that moment. And I do think that's a big deal. I put in a ton of stock in guys who do not shy away from the moment. I mean, it's why like, Jalen Brunson, obviously not just because he scored the points, but like no fear whatsoever. That's the ultimate example. But you can see guys who don't want to play, who don't want the ball late in games, or just become shrink in these bigger spots. I don't think that's a worry with him. I'm not saying it is with Peterson, but with Dybantsa, definitely not a worry. And I think when you're a team that is trying to, what they win 50 games the last 3 years, like the one concern always when you tank that degree is, did you screw up the culture so much? Do these guys get used to losing or whatever? It's not that the 19-year-old coming in would change that. You obviously do have Trae Young and Davis, but his mentality, I do think, is a pretty good one for a team that needs to raise its level of competitiveness. So I just feel like he's the better fit. If they really think Peterson can play the one, like for real, then maybe there's enough flexibility there. But it just feels like he's a two guard for the most part. And Dybantsa, I don't know what he is exactly, but he can be a lot of things. And that just feels very intriguing. It's also like I'm not comparing him to Keyshawn George or Will Riley, but like, they've had success in drafting some guys that could play multiple spots, and it just feels like Dybantsa would fit in pretty well with that.
Richie Saunders, I think, tore his ACL on February 14th. And in all of the games since then, Dybantsa had at least 20 points. Three of those games, he had 35 plus. He averaged 31 in the Big 12 tournament, including a 40-point game against Kansas State. In the NCAA tournament, he had 35. And if you watch that game, he was getting double and triple teamed. And
Right.
Texas coach literally said in the middle of the first quarter or the middle of the first half, we cannot stop him. There's nothing we can do. There's
Yeah.
nobody. And that's a team like Texas that made it to the Sweet 16, like a good basketball team that had no answers for this guy when he had played college basketball for 30 plus games, had figured it out, the entire game plan going towards him, which if he projects to be what he is in the NBA, a number one option, top scorer, that's what's going to happen, right? And he showed that he wasn't scared of the moment. And we've seen it with Kyle Kuzma, Jordan Poole. It's like anybody when they're a third, fourth, fifth option can do well when they're spacing the floor. But when the ball is in your hands and the game plan's against you, they struggled mightily. And it's not
Yeah.
every player that can kind of go out and get a bucket when the entire defense is schemed to stop it. And AJ did that. And Darryn did too, but I was also just pretty pleased with what I saw from because that's what AJ is going to have to do in the league. And I
Yep.
don't know if that's Boozer or Peterson. I don't know if I have that much belief in it because if you're the Wizards, you're drafting a guy to be your top option, to be your scoring engine, and to me, that's Dybantsa pretty much to a T. Um, Getting towards the end of this, obviously you've talked to a lot of people about what the Wizards are going to do. I know you've talked to Jeff Goodman as well, and I saw him tweet out today that it's pretty funny that nobody knows what the Wizards are going to do this late in the draft. It kind of tells you the front office has done a pretty good job this late in the process that no one truly knows what they're going to do. Just gut feeling from what you've heard, from what you've seen after Tuesday at 8 p.m. Who are the Wizards going to take at one?
I think it comes down to are the, like, and I, Jonathan Gavoni used to be the ESPN draft analyst. He's like flummoxed. At least when I saw an interview a couple weeks ago, he's like flummoxed that people think Dybantsa should go one because he said he saw them play in the same game 8 times, and each time he walked away thinking Peterson was the better guy. Peterson was the number one guy coming into the season. I saw ESPN's their current analyst Jeremy Wu today said he flipped from Dybantsa one to Peterson. So it feels like there's momentum going in that direction. But that's the question. Do the Wizards buy that hype? I just think Dybantsa makes more sense for them. Again, the fit is not necessarily the biggest issue right now, but the fit I think is better with him right now versus considering what else they have. The switchability feels like a guy that makes more sense for what I believe that Dawkins and Winger are looking for. So and like I get that like Peterson, people are saying is like maybe the more other than Boozer, the most like pro ready guy, but I feel like Dybantsa's got of the two, not counting Boozer, like the highest floor because of there's some of the mystery there. So if I had to guess, I would go Dybantsa. Like I said, it does feel like there's some momentum with Peterson, but not necessarily with the Wizards, just broadly of like, okay, put him one. So I'd go Dybantsa. I'm going to throw this out to you. Okay, so I'm trying to think like everybody wants to have fun with the trade, but nobody wants to trade more down further than two, right? And we assume that Utah does kind of want Dybantsa. All right, tell me if this works. Could you trade, hypothetically, the first pick and Trey Johnson for the second pick and Ace Bailey, and Utah, just because they are the ones that have to move up, gives in whatever, a number one or something. Like, I'm not saying move on from Trey Johnson, but a year ago, apparently the Wizards wanted Ace Bailey.
Mm.
Ace Bailey and Dybantsa would be a little bit repetitive. The Wizards don't would need another guard, right? Because they don't. What does Trey Johnson do? But Ace Bailey could then fit into that slot. So you're the trade machine guy. What do you think? Would you do that or no?
That's fascinating because you've seen the Ace Bailey just to move up one spot, but you haven't seen the reciprocation because every Utah fan was like, there's no way we're doing it. It's too much. I don't know. I mean, like Utah had the choice between those two, and it seemed like no matter how much Bailey didn't want Utah, they took him anyway. So I,
Sure,
I
sure.
think they probably believe in him a lot more than they believed in Trey Johnson in order to take him like that. If I'm the Wizards, I probably still don't do that. I think I'm pretty comfortable at the spot I'm in, because I think Dybantsa projects to be a better wing than Ace Bailey does. And
Yeah,
if I'm the Wizards, like I think Darryn Peterson projects obviously better than Trey Johnson, but I like where I'm at. And I think both teams do. That's why I don't think a trade is going to happen. I think both teams are set up pretty well. And we'll see how this all unfolds. I will say you did talk about there's growing momentum that Peterson is maybe the best player, but the momentum seemingly still with Dybantsa to go number one. Which again, like ESPN reflects it perfectly. Jeremy Woo has Peterson number one on his big board, which is his opinion. But in the mock draft, where they're trying to predict how they actually think it'll go, Dybantsa has remained number one throughout the entire process, even with Peterson as their top prospect. So
Yeah.
maybe Peterson is the consensus top prospect in this class, but it seems like Peter Dybantsa is the consensus number one pick for Washington. You seemingly think that'll be the pick. I also agree. I think Mark Stein said his thought process throughout the entire time has been Dybantsa will be the number one pick. So I guess in 4 days we'll find all that stuff out and more. But again, thank you so much, Ben, for coming on the show. Ben does great work with the Commanders, but he also launched a Wizards newsletter. So everyone watching this should go subscribe to that. But please give everyone more information on where they can find your work.
Greg, I appreciate the time here. Yeah, lastmanstanding.substack.com. Basically, the newsletter just means it was always confusing to me. I write an article, it gets emailed to the people. Obviously, I have one for the Commanders, and at the moment, it's being intermixed with the Wizards. But I don't want to. Some Commanders people get upset. They don't want. Well, they just want the clean feed. So eventually, it's going to be a Wizards only, and there is one now. So you can go to the site, check that out. You can sign up for free, but obviously, I encourage you to sign up for a subscription. You get both sites access to me, all that kind of fun stuff.
As a very happy subscriber, my dad is too. I would
Oh,
recommend the Substack 100%. But again, thank you so much for coming on the show, Ben. That's going to do it for this episode of the Wizards podcast. Thanks for listening as always.